Subscribe to this podcast to get exclusive access to the after show Shooting the Breeze. So today we have a special guest on again. We have author Dawn Stark, and she has written a book called Called to War: How Life's Battles Transform Us for God's Purposes. I thoroughly enjoyed reading the book. I thought it was fantastic, and I loved how open and transparent you were about everything that you've experienced. So why don't you start out just by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do right now?
Sure. Well, I'm glad to be here with you today and be part of your podcast. Thank you for inviting me to come on and tell my story. My name is Dawn
Pleasure.
Stark. My author name is Dawn Amsden Stark because there was several Dawn Starks out there. So my maiden name is,
Okay.
that's why you're going to find that on my website and in my book. But yes, so I've been a Christian since I was 5 years old. I was a pastor's daughter, pastor's wife, and found ourselves in a very long infertility journey, which really pretty much has defined my life. And was through that process then I've ended up becoming an advocate for children and families. And now I work for Operation Blessing. I'm a philanthropy manager for Operation Blessing. We serve 39 countries and in all kinds of humanitarian work. And then, I'm an author and a mom. So that's my life today.
Awesome. So with that charity, what's the link to your charity?
It's operationblessing.org. It's the
Operation Blessing.
humanitarian arm of the Christian Broadcasting Network. So we serve vulnerable populations, and our four main pillars are clean water, medical care, disaster relief, and health.
Perfect. I'll include a link to that in the description.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great. Right now, we're serving Ukrainian refugees, and we're working on the border of Poland and Romania. So that fits under our disaster relief work. So that's taking quite a bit of our time right now, is raising
Yeah, I
funds.
bet.
Yeah.
So I did find your testimony quite fascinating. Did you want to just tell our viewers your testimony here so they can kind of get a feel for what your journey was like?
Sure. So, well, mainly the story of my book is about our 23-year infertility journey, and it's how, as a young Christian, I think Christians in our era at least have this expectation that if you know the Lord, life is going to be easy, or I don't know. We just expect that we're going to get the answers to our problems. And I know we read about trials, but I don't think we understand really how God uses these difficult journeys to deepen and sharpen our faith,
Yeah.
really change us so that he can use us for his glory. So, I found myself right about 20 years old starting an incredibly painful journey of infertility. And I was lost in that for a very long time. Also, pre-internet, so information wasn't as readily as accessible as it is today. Now you can, do a Google search on anything, like
Yeah, we're kind of
driving
spoiled.
down the road and go, well, I wonder where that business came from. And before your next stoplight, you kind of have the answer for it. But
Yeah.
back then it was you went to the library or you ordered a book in a bookstore and you looked through yellow pages to try to find the physicians that you needed. So part of the struggle for me in the early years of my infertility was not having the answers and also being completely thrown off in why this was happening to me in my faith journey. So that
Yeah.
journey, I mean, we can get into it more, but um, there's a whole chapter of adoption. I wouldn't consider adoption because my dad was adopted, had a very negative stigma in our family. So it wasn't an option for me. And God had to change my heart on all sorts of things, like, could I live without children and still be okay? Could I make it through depression and find a path through worship? How do you live when the very thing you want doesn't come into your hands?
Hmm.
So that's really what, it was 10 years, what I call the first portion of our infertility journey. And, I love having this conversation this week because this is National Infertility Awareness Week here in the US. So it's important to me to help normalize this experience for women, to help other people find the answers so they're not lost like I was for, I'm going to say, 4 or 5 years of the early part of my journey.
Yeah. And I do think that is very important because you get to feel so alone
Yes.
in your situations, and God has a way of bringing people or messages into your life to speak to you. And I think it's very important. And how do you
And
see,
he uses those alone seasons too.
yeah, he does. Yeah,
Those are
very
those
much so.
wilderness places. So maybe even the answers were there and they were hidden from me just so I could begin to deepen the need I had for my savior. Just
Yeah.
it's hard to know. I'm thinking in hindsight, it was just because the information wasn't readily available. But I'm going through other journeys in my life now where I don't have the answers I need. And so I do think that God leads us down some dark, night seasons,
Yeah.
wilderness seasons, whatever term you want to apply there, because he's working something deeper inside of us that we couldn't do on our own.
Yeah. Well, and we need those periods of growth. We and usually trials is the only way to really get us to grow and encourage us to grow. Um, how do you see God at work in your life right now, like with all the different areas, your charity or your personal life?
Um, so I see him at work just, daily lining up my paths. I'm at the stage of life where so much of what I've studied and so much of the steps behind me are helping me order my future.
Yeah.
So when I write, I feel his presence in the words that I write, the direction that I need to go. I'm mature in my faith enough now where if I don't sense the Lord is in something and I'm pressing against a wall that doesn't open, I kind of back off from that wall and wait to see maybe that's not the direction or maybe that's not the timing. And in my youth, my exuberance would have um, just tried to propel me through that wall. you know,
Yeah.
Impatience or whatever. You can look at all of the Old Testament saints and see what youth did and how many times they had to buck into a wall before they finally maybe learned what the Lord was trying to say. So I do feel like I walk with the Lord in a deeper place because of some of the things I've been through. And I'm also not so thrown that when something hard comes, I'm not so quick to blame myself like it's sin or something I did caused something hard to happen.
Hmm.
That's just not the truth.
Yeah.
Hard things happen because we live in a fallen world,
Yeah.
not because we've done something wrong.
Yeah. And so with your infertility battle, what was that like both emotionally and spiritually for you?
Um, well, it was devastating. I felt like God was denying me the one thing I needed for life. I didn't know the difference between delayed is not denied. So that's you read my book, that there's a whole
Yeah, for
section
sure.
on that. Um, I think we presume, especially in Western society, that that life is easy and things come, you just do the right things and you get the right answer. We haven't dealt with a lot of hardships, like some of the area. Speaking of my work, people who live where they don't have clean water, it doesn't matter what they do right, they're still not able to live a normal existence because of illness and sanitation issues that all their work effort goes to get clean water. So life in our world is much more comfortable, much easier. And so we don't take hardships, I don't think, quite the same way. We interpret them differently. And so there was just a lot of throwing my belief system up in the air in those early days, and newlywed, and well, we've been married a year, but that strained our marriage for years and years and years. When you're talking about infertility, you're talking about the intimate part of your life and your
Yeah.
relationship, and there's a point in that progression where what should be private becomes very public. It becomes public because people start to realize you're not having children. It becomes public because of the intrusiveness of what the nature of the doctor visits are like,
Yeah.
and the solutions to bring you forward. So it's just a lot of kind of tearing you down.
Yeah, I know. I do have a friend of ours that they suffer with infertility, and they've now become foster parents and adopted their foster child, and it's been quite a journey for them as well. And it was public, like people figured it out pretty quick, and we knew earlier because I mean we're friends with them, but I know the challenges and struggles that they went through, and I know they didn't share all of it. There must have been a lot of behind the scenes stuff that wasn't
Right.
shared.
Yeah, typically
Um,
people will work through, well, it depends, but I have found normally, if people are on this journey, you typically resolve at least the options for biological children before you start on an adoption pathway. There are people that, when they step in infertility, they just upfront decide treatment's not for them, and they feel like the Lord leads them to adoption. Then there are, but I think there are more from the people I've met and engaged with throughout the course of my life. Most of the time, people run through the treatment cycle first, which is really what I would recommend. I think you really, both journeys are equally difficult and
mhm.
painful and expensive and heart-wrenching. You really can't do a treatment and an adoption journey at the same time. It's I think it's really impossible. So I think you kind of run one through and come to some point of resolution before you maybe start that other journey of, adoption. But in any case, whichever journey you're on, because I've done both, adoption is intrusive too. People are combing through your history, your financial records,
Yeah,
walking through your home. I can't tell you how many times we were fingerprinted and interviewed, and even our biological children who were, when we adopted, were pretty young, 4 and 7, I think, when we started the adoption journey. They all got interviewed, by these social workers. So either way you go about it, when your fertility is not within your um, sphere of control, you're put in a vulnerable position, and then you got to make your soul figure out the pathway through that. And for some people, for me, it led to depression, and I had to figure out how that journey looked and how to come through on the other side. For my husband, because we had male factor infertility, it actually led him into an alcohol addiction, which I talked briefly about in the book. But if you don't deal with your pain healthy, you there is some sort of a crutch that you fall to get through when your world falls apart. And for
yeah,
us, that's what it was. We both handled it differently, and it put a real strain on our marriage.
yeah. And you touched briefly on the adoption experience. I know it definitely had its challenges. What was that experience and that journey like, and what's it been like since you've adopted?
Yeah. So for us, adoption, and I'd love for people to read the book and understand, the infertility story with treatment was about 16 years of our life. You know, by the time I got through that, I had a daughter who came 10 years in, and then I had a set of twins that came in my final treatment. And then I really thought my family was done because, as I told you, I didn't see myself being an adoptive parent. But this thing happened inside my heart. And I really, Tony, the only thing I can tell you is God healed me, to this new place where He planted a seed of adoption in my heart at just the right time, when I was able to hear it and see it differently. And
Mhm.
really, that's kind of what I talk about in my book. My process and my transformation process, it kind of goes through the fact that God gives me new eyes and new ears and a new heart, so that data that He gave to me at one season looked completely different, right, in another one. So
Yeah,
I get where my babies were. Lydia was probably 7. My twins might have been 4, something like that. And just on Christmas night, in 2005, somebody had given me a Stephen Curtis Chapman video. I don't even know to this day where this video came from, but it was in my house, and we came home from Christmas Day, and I put my babies to bed, and I popped that DVD in, and I watched, he's a singer songwriter who is a very pro adoption and a strong advocate for international adoption. And I just sobbed. I knew that I was going to adopt. I don't know how God does these things in your life, but in an instant, I knew I was supposed to adopt internationally. And even called my sister that night, and she had 3 children, no infertility. And I said, Deidre, I want to adopt internationally. I think you're supposed to too. She said, yes, I think we should. And so, we like jokingly said we need to tell our husbands about this life change, and anyway, what ended up happening, long story, we went through all the orphan petition, the orphan visa petitions. You have to, for us from the Department of State, you have to get approved. And we got our home studies done. And 9 months to the day later, I found my son on a Waiting Children's website in Guatemala. And Dennis, it was his name, which just happened to be the same name as my dad. And I think the real miracle in this is that my son Dennis is Mayan, born to a tribal mother who doesn't even speak Spanish. She speaks a tribal language. And she named him my dad's name, which isn't even a
cool.
Hispanic name, So it couldn't have been any clearer. Here's your sign, sort of like, this is your baby, and what has happened in our family. And of course, there's a lot to this story, but our family line has been healed of adoption by adoption, and just this beautiful way that only a sovereign God can do. My dad has been healed of some of his story by watching his grandson being raised, and it's just been beautiful. I do want to say, so I'm always careful because adoption isn't some fantasy. It's not dream come true. You make a family and everything's okay. These kids are kids from trauma. This is partially why I'm an advocate for this population. Adoption only occurs because something was broken in the beginning. There was a broken family that in the beginning. So there's just a lot that goes into being an adoptive parent, and really learning and getting educated on kids from hard places and trauma informed care. So if anybody here is listening, I'm a realist, and I believe God can work mightily through adoption, and it's a very redemptive process, but it's also a very difficult journey, and you need a lot of wisdom and grace to navigate that pathway as well.
Yeah, for sure. And how have you seen God at work throughout this whole journey and process for you?
I'm constantly amazed how I see everything different now than I did when I started. I don't know why it took me so long to see things from God's perspective, and because now it seems so clear. When I was 12, I really felt like he called me to missions. And because I couldn't understand that missions wasn't only just going to serve the Lord in a foreign land, I just closed the door on that in my heart. And, embarrassingly, I can tell you 40 years later, God moved my family to Florida so I could be an advocate for children and families here. And I learned then that all along what his intention for me for missions was not what I thought. It was to help somebody and serve somebody and bring Jesus to somebody and connect people together and share about the need and defend the widows and the orphans. And so my template for missions has been completely rebuilt, and even now it's raising funds to raise funds for those projects that I'm passionate about, and to connect people and their passion to help others and connect the needs, with the provision. So it's just funny to me. It is almost laughable to me sometimes how much I missed what God meant, just because in one era of your life, your paradigms are so small that you can't possibly understand what God's picture is until you get into it. And then you go, my goodness, it's so beautiful. And it's exactly what I would have wanted. And I would have never known how to even ask,
Yeah, and it's amazing because it's hard to grasp. God views things from a big view. He sees everything, and we just see this tiny little small thinking of the now. And it's hard to imagine, he does have a plan for us, and he does guide us where he wants us and what he knows is going to be best for us. But we have choice, freedom of choice. And so it's hard to grasp for people, but it's amazing once you do kind of really start trying to grasp that and focusing on the fact that God knows what's best for you.
Yeah. And the other big thing is you have to be okay with leaning into the unknown and leaning into the uncomfortable and leaning into the risk, and trusting that God's going to meet you there. I can tell you 100% that if I had not continued in treatment, we would not have children. I know that. We've never had a single pregnancy in all of these years. So I really believe that it, I sought God and I trusted him and I leaned into him and I thought I followed him every time. And then we ended up with these miracle babies, including the two from Guatemala. And any point, I could have not taken any of those difficult journeys. I know you read my book, and there's a lot
Yeah,
of difficult journeys in there that
definitely.
were
Yeah.
they were wholly volitional. Every single one of them I said yes to, and there was risk in all of them, but there was also great reward.
Yeah. I found it fascinating too that your adopted kids are from Guatemala. My sister-in-law is actually from Guatemala. And her dad had a lot of issues with alcohol and that kind of stuff too. So he wasn't really around. So her mom took them or moved. And so she tried a long time to get into the US and still is not actually legally allowed to go into the US because they weren't trying legally.
Right.
Until she was able to get a visa in Canada. And
Okay.
her story is funny because my brother and her were actually pen pals growing up,
Oh,
and they had lost touch. And then all of a sudden, my brother moved to Frontier, Saskatchewan, which is like this tiny little town with like 300 people, because that's where my dad was working. And she had a sister who was living in Frontier, working where my dad works. And so they ended up meeting, and then they're like, "Oh my word!" Like we
is that
we were pen
crazy?
pals. And then my brother moved to Regina at that point too, and it was just a kind of a whirlwind for them, and they ended up getting married, and they have a wonderful son and another one on the way. And it's
Incredible.
amazing. Again, God at work. Like,
Yes.
what are the chances these two pen pals are going to meet years later, like in a small
That
town?
is,
Like,
yeah, in a different country. Yeah.
yeah, where she wasn't even really living there. It's just her
Right.
sister was living there. Like, just amazing. Just
It is
I,
incredible. It is
yeah,
incredible. But what's going to be so fun in eternity is seeing all those things for everybody's story, all these
yeah,
amazing things that could have only been the hand of a sovereign God. It's
yeah.
beautiful.
And God's glory shines through in everything. Like,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just, that's why I always try and say, like, it's not my podcast, it's God's, and it's God for God's glory. Like, that's what everything I do now is for God's glory. And my dad kind of helped me realize that and focus on that too. Like, it's to glorify God. That's why we're here.
Good.
And through your book, I saw that kind of throughout all the pages, that God's glory was at work in everything.
Mhm.
And I'm going to ask you an obvious question, but what inspired you to write the book? And tell us a little bit about the book as well, just a little bit more from what we've been doing.
Well, the book is a miracle too, really. The outline for this book came, I think Lydia was born, or was just about to be born. And, I've always been a journaler, not a writer like I have been in the last 15 years, but I always journaled for years and years of my infertility. And I sat down one day and wrote this whole outline, which is actually, I think, part of the introduction in the book. I'm going to check real quick. Yeah, the introduction is in there. And it was this whole concept of, how did I get here? I didn't sign up for this war. I don't
Mhm.
want to be in a war. I don't know what's going on. I was so confused. I just wanted out. And I wrote then an outline for a book called Infertility Wars. I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but it was my weapons of war, spy called fear, just these concepts. And then I don't even know, like, I was in the middle of my adoption process and was going through a drawer and found this and pulled it out, this prophetic outline for a book. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what my story was, And so I started leaning into this, like, I think there's a book here, and this is a really cool idea. this comparison to like a militaristic journey. I mean, the scriptures filled with this imagery was, not hard to make that comparison. So I tell it metaphorically, like I was enlisted into warfare. And in the book, I tell my story. I lay it over what a military journey might
Yeah.
look like in that season, and then I give usually some kind of biblical analogy,
Yeah,
or
I thought
if
that
I'm
was a very unique perspective. I like that.
yeah, but it was God. So I sat down at one point before the adoptions were done, and I started drafting the infertility chapters. And every time I sat down to write, it just felt holy. I don't know how to say that, except I felt like the Holy Spirit was really authoring the book. And there were times I couldn't even type it as fast as I was hearing it. And I would just, like frantically, I would get in this vein of making notes. And then, then I had two more kids. So I had five kids, and I've earned 2 degrees since my 5 children came. And so there were many, many years this book sat in a drawer. And then I would feel inspired to pull it out, and I'd read through it and go, man, that's really, really good. And then, I'd finish this section. And then in 2015, we moved to Florida, which 5 kids, and I had a new job, and it just completely threw everything up in the air. So I threw it in a drawer again, and then COVID came along. And my job that I have now was traveling and visiting with partners in the Southeast. So almost every other week I was on the road, and I'm saying to the Lord, what am I going to do now? I mean, I'm home. My kids were here, but I'm a project person. I was done with my degree, and what am I going to do now? And then I went, oh, I got to write this book. And within 3 months, then I finished the whole thing. And it's my story, but I wrote it in the beginning for my children because I wanted them to know their story.
Mm-hmm.
So when they run against, whatever the impossible transformation journey the Lord calls them to in their life, I want them to know that that's the very fact that they're here is evidence that God does the impossible. And as I'm writing it, I realized this isn't just for my family. This is for other people, whatever their journey is. It doesn't have to be infertility. It can be unemployment. It could be death of a loved one. It could be a terminal illness. It could be a handicap or a disability. There are a lot of impossible things we as humans face. And I think this pattern is applicable to a lot of different types of journeys.
Yeah, I felt the connection with my own kind of journey in terms of my health, because I've never been blessed with good health. And right now my health has been so poor, and it's been, I've had to really change my focus and focus on it as being a blessing, because it's given me time to focus and learn about God. Yes. and really figure out what God wants me to be doing. And I wouldn't be doing these podcasts if I hadn't been put on disability. It's just been God kind of being like, this is where I want you, and this is kind of your journey for it. And I'm in pain all the time because of I have severe fibromyalgia, because of 2 heart procedures I had done. But it's just, I have to stop thinking of it as being a hindrance and start thinking of it as a blessing, because it's given me time for my kids. It's given me time to really focus and grow my relationship with Christ that I wouldn't have done if I was working.
Right.
So it's amazing. Looking back, we can kind of see these things, and I wish kind of God would show me exactly like, what are we doing here? But he doesn't work that way.
To find a purpose in the pain is really incredible, because I think there are some things we never really completely see that purpose for. But by living in thankfulness and gratitude, and really at the end of the day, trusting that God is good. I think I struggled a long time to find his goodness, and that would be a regret I have, that I spent so much time in the waiting season mourning this thing that I thought wasn't going to happen. That, like, so for instance, right now, my oldest daughter, our miracle, she's 25, and she's in a waiting season in her life. And I'm able to guide her differently than anybody guided me through that. I'm able to help her focus on what you're talking about. Well, what is that you're doing today that's meaningful and impactful and feed your soul? and that you know God brought you, and then be content in that without fearing that these desires of your heart will never be met, because there's no evidence in scripture to believe that's true.
Yeah. Well, and he
You
kind of
know?
brings you to that moment of peace. And
Yeah,
and that's what I'm beginning to really realize and feel is that moment of peace, that he's just bringing peace to my heart. And
good.
I was reading Turning Points. I get there, and In Touch, I get all their devotionals and stuff. And just lately it's been so much, the theme of the devotions has been being at peace, doing what God wants you to do, following his will. And I'm like, okay, God, I hear you. Like,
Yeah,
you're
good.
bringing everything in. And then the pastor spoke on it as well. Right after I read the devotion, he spoke on the same thing. I'm just like, yeah, the message is getting in. I'm hearing it.
Good, good. Yeah, I mean, I
um,
think those things we can't understand in some ways are weights that we need to let set aside.
yeah,
We spend so much time trying to figure, factor, resolve. Okay, but life doesn't come at you from hindsight. It comes at you one day at a time. So these things we can't resolve, we just need to set them aside. Even if you have to write them on a list and get them out of your brain, and set them aside, because you just got to live today and be thankful today. God gives us our daily bread. I really believe that. And sometimes that's not the best tasting bread every day. And then sometimes it's just amazing. And so you've got to learn to be content with that provision, I think.
yeah, that's very true. And I really respected how open and honest you were in your book. I really, really loved that. And I just want to know, what was it like putting your life into a book format?
Well, because I was writing it for my children when it started, it felt okay and safe. Um, and then it got done, and I had a huge panic, like, I don't know what I'm doing, and this is a lot of private information. Um, so I gave it to people that I could trust, that were safe to read it and to get their feedback, and then really got the bringing to production. It just took so much time, and that I was able to kind of process through, like, well, if people, I wrote this because this is how God wanted me to write it. The process to publication helped me be okay with the whole thing. And then I found that I queried a bunch of publishers, and I had some interest. I just didn't want to, I wanted to make the best economic decision for my family. And it didn't make sense to sign away the rights to my life book for, pennies, basically. So, but I also had agents tell me, well, you need to cut out this whole half of the book. And I thought, I found that I started defending it, because I was like, well, no, actually, I can't cut out the adoption story, because then I'm not even including two of my five children in the book. Like,
Yeah,
it doesn't even make sense. And then I had somebody who told me to end it after my first daughter was born. But then, there was nothing in it that brought you all the way through to the point of my transformation, which happens in the final part of the book.
yeah,
But I realized it's not about me and me getting my kids or me getting my healing. It was about me being transformed to help others. That's the point of the book. So I couldn't really cut that out. So this journey to publication really helped me, like, get my head around, like, no, this is what I want to say. And
it's a
this is,
frustrating process.
yeah. And
It is.
it also gets you to a point where you can really articulate the purpose of your book. And so I just decided the first book is an offering to the Lord, exactly like he gave it to me. I mean, I had it edited, I'm not saying that. And there were a lot of people that helped shape it, but I decided not to dissect it to meet a mass market appeal, because that wasn't really the purpose of this story. I have other books in my heart, and we'll see what the Lord wants me to do with that. But this one really is my testimony. And I felt like it needed to stand in the way it was given to me. So by the time I got to the process of it being released, I felt really comfortable with everything I said. And I could live knowing that people knew, just things about all sorts of aspects of our life. I'm totally okay with that.
So where can people find you and your book online?
So Dawn Amsden Stark, that's Dawn, Amsden Stark.com is my website. I have resources there for infertility and for fostering and for adoption. I have a lot of resources on my website to help point people to good books or good networks that can help them. I'm also always available to answer any questions or help anybody who's walking on that journey. Um, I have my blog out there as well, and I'm on all the social media platforms at Dawn Amsden Stark as well. So Facebook,
Perfect.
Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, I'm out there and active on all those platforms, and would love for people to connect with me. I really am telling my story so that I can help other people in their journeys of transformation. That really is my whole intent.
Yeah, I think that is very admirable. And if you could give one piece of advice for those struggling with infertility right now, what would that advice be?
You're not alone. Find somebody that walks that journey with you. If it's me, if it's a network in your community that you find through Resolve, if it's a church group, I attend Elevation Church. I have an infertility support group that's available on the elevation.com website that they're welcome to join me on Monday nights. Um, I think the biggest thing is for infertility, because it's so intensely personal, people struggle with bringing others in on their story. And the fact that, life is communal. We were meant for a relationship and
Mhm.
connectivity. So anything that we go through alone that isolates us is just a danger for all sorts of things to happen to us, depression or anxiety, that in a group of others who are walking that with you, there's just support. And I think for me, the biggest thing I want to say to people is don't walk it alone. And if you're a Christian and you're listening to this podcast, settle in your heart that God is good and that he loves you and that he has good things for you. And though you may not understand it today, trust him and just abide in him, and he's going to bring you through whatever journey you're facing.
Yeah, that's a very, very important message. I want to thank you for coming on. I very much appreciate you explaining your story, and again, your open honesty. I absolutely love that. So thank you for coming on. Is there any final thoughts you wanna give our viewers before we sign off?
I think that's it. Don't be afraid of those journeys of transformation. Good things come in hard places. And I'm in several of them even right now. The journeys don't stop. But as you grow with God, that confidence will carry you through that next journey, that you're going to find him in the middle of those struggles.
Awesome. Thank you again. I really, really appreciate it. Well, I have just been blessed with so many people who are requesting to be on the show, and I'm impressed with how many people want to share their testimonies or what they're doing for the Lord right now. If I haven't got back to you, I promise I will get back to you. I look forward to speaking with each of you and interviewing you, and keep tuning into the show. There's lots of new people that are coming on here, and if you're considering wanting to come on the show, just shoot me an email at tpeters745 at gmail.com, and I will get back to you.